All right, I think we're live again. So we're back for the second half of tonight's little tie-in demo, and we're about to do the problem child and the Fat Angie. But before we get there, I'm going to let people kind of get pulled back into the show, and I'll answer a couple of those questions that I missed on that last go round, and I'm still getting a few here, so I'll try to keep up, but we'll go fast. So somebody asked what the best thread for elk hair flies is, and generally speaking, it depends on what you're tying. The short answer is if you're having trouble breaking thread with elk hair flies, some of that Simperfly nano silk is the way to go. Super. I might have jumped the gun a little early there. Super strong and really nice stuff. Very small. It's a little slippery for dubbing. It's not for everything, but pretty darn good. Somebody asked what my favorite materials to tie with are, and to this day, I don't depend on materials so much as the application. So hair and hackle and foam, and it's kind of standard issue stuff. I have been playing with polypropylene macrame yarn a lot, which you'll see coming up in the Fat Angie video. That's simply just the most buoyant material I've ever used. So that's sort of the new one. I mix colors on that and play with that quite a bit. And yeah, they're telling me that I jumped a little early. So what I said there at the beginning is we're gonna come into the rest of tonight's tie demo and do the problem child and the Fat Angie here on the second half, answering questions from the end of the last one. So hopefully we're caught up. We've got a little gap in between. So I thought I was live. I was just sitting here talking to myself for a little bit, which is not unusual. Somebody asked how many flies if I tie for a full day. So if I back in the day tying commercially, I would try to do back when I was a kid, I'd try to do $100 worth of flies a day. So it depended on what fly it was and how much I was getting paid. But typically, I'd say 10 dozen flies in a day, 10 dozen trout flies. If I was doing something really easy, you could do 25 dozen, if you really put your nose to it. I think the most flies I've ever done in a day, and that was like a whole day from early to late, was about 80 dozen. That was a long time ago. These days I don't worry about tying fast. I'm sort of retired from commercial tying, at least in bulk and volume. So I don't worry about tying fast. I love to sit down and just tie stuff in my box and make each one perfect and pretty and think about it each step of the way. And, I think that's that opportunity to slow down is maybe a better tire. So I always tell people, don't try to be fast, just try to be good. Speed will come with that. So and then the last question I had written down here, and I'll check Instagram here in a second, but why the UV resin on top? The UV resin's on top of the Juju Baetis the Juju Baetis and the 2-bit. It magnifies the flash and the rib, and it adds durability to the whole fly. It also adds a little bit of weight, so no downside to that. Originally they were both 5-minute epoxy, but with the advent of resin, use Solar thin resin. That stuff is so easy to use and so instantaneous, you can't really get around it. So let's see if there's any Instagram questions that came up. It looks like just people are just coming in. So I don't think I see anything there. Lance Egan is in the house. Lance, it's good to see you. I always like seeing your little happy face. The Charlie Craven flies about hot dogs and popcorn. Well, yeah, you're a little slow, maybe, Colin. All right, I think I got them all. I don't see anything new on here. So with that, if Sam and Russ are ready to go, I think we'll go into tying the problem child. This one is a sort of a little attractor nymph, just kind of along the lines. Think where you'd fish a prince nymph, generic attractor nymph. Double beads, because I like to get them down and keep them down. Also adds kind of a little peekaboo hot spot the way we do it, and it's a really cool trick for making a big feather. We're going to use a Coq de Leon hen saddle feather to make a smaller collar. Those CDL hen saddles are just beautiful feathers, but they're so big, and I really wanted to find a way to use those on a smaller fly. So that was sort of the impetus behind this fly, trying to come up with a way to use those beautiful feathers to make a smaller soft tackle, and the fly kind of came along with the technique. So that trick is in the video, how we're going to do it, and hopefully here we're going to start this video now, and here comes the problem child. This one's named after my youngest son, Jonathan, who's a little trouble every now and again, but man, he's a good kid, and he's a hard worker, and so is this fly. So I hope you enjoy this one. So here we go. All right, we're about to tie the problem child. What I've got here in the vise is a Daiichi 1160 in a size 14 with two 3/32 tungsten beads. I've got a purple and a red Umpqua radiant tungsten bead on there. Now you can tie this in a variety of different sizes, and there's also another Daiichi hook, an 1167, that is identical to this, just with a black nickel finish, and either one is acceptable. I'm going to start some red 14-aught Vivus thread just behind that first bead. And I'm going to wrap back to just past the point on the barb. And once I get back there, I'm going to build a little nub of thread, and I'm just going to stack up several turns of thread to make a small bump back here. And this bump, while it does help to separate the biot tails that we're about to put in, it's really just for a little hot spot. So I've just made a small nub there, and I'll bump my thread forward just a few turns to get it out of the way. And then I'm going to put just a light coat of Solar Bone Dry on top of that thread nub. And you want to make sure that you're just on that thread nub so you don't glue your thread down that you move forward, because we are going to move it back. So I just want to coat that all the way around with a thin coat of Bone Dry. And I'll hit that with my UV lamp. And that just toughens up that thread nub. That'll keep that from fraying later when you're fishing the fly, and makes it just a bit more durable. Also adds a little bit of shininess to it. And now I'll unwind the thread back to the front edge of that nub. And now I'm ready to tie in my biot tails. And what I'm going to use for the tails are two purple turkey biots. And what I've done here is I've opposed the two biots so that they're curving away from each other. And then I'm going to measure them just short of a shank length long. I'm going to tie these in at the bend by putting them on either side of the hook shank and tilting them just slightly toward me. So you can see right here is square, and I'm going to turn them just slightly toward me. And I'll take a turn of thread all the way around, but I really haven't tightened this yet. Now typically I let this happen in my fingers, but I want you to watch here. Once I've got that thread wrap around, as I tighten it, I can square those biots up, and you can sort of tweak them into place a bit. I'm pretty happy there. And then I can tighten those thread wraps coming forward from there. So I've got a nice even split tail just over the top of that nub. If you need to, you can tweak these ends. I think I'm pretty good there. And I'll come forward over those butt ends to just short of that red bead, and I'll trim the butts off. Now I'm going to take a piece of 1/100th Mirage lateral scale. I'm going to tie this in just up here behind the bead. I'll catch it, draw it down to length, and wrap back over it all the way back to the base of the tail. So nothing fancy here. I want to butt those tails right up to that thread nub. And I'll take that piece of flash and I'll just clip it back here in my material spring so it's out of the way for the time being. Now for the body, what I'll use is, this is Nature Spirit Emergence stubbing. And it's a synthetic mix, a mix of different synthetic fibers in different colors. And I've mixed just a tiny little bit of red eye stub into mine. You can see there's just a few little red highlights, and that's just to sort of match up the tones. I'm going to take a small pinch of this. And I'm going to apply this to the thread as tightly as I can to build a tapered abdomen. I need just a bit more here. So I'm going to twist that on tightly. And then I'll begin to build the abdomen. And what I want to do is make the first turn of dubbing back here at the base of the tail. And then work forward from there, sort of building my taper as I go. You can see I can kind of come forward a couple wraps and back up a few wraps. And I'm going to come pretty well right up to the back of that red bead. And hopefully run out of dubbing just exactly where I want it to. So just a tapered abdomen, nothing special there, a little on the chunky side. And now I'm going to take my piece of tinsel and I'm going to counter wrap this, just because this is a coarser dubbing. And this will help set it out on top of the dubbing. I'm going to counter wrap the Mirage tinsel right up to the back of the bead. And then I'll tie it off there with several tight turns of thread before I clip it. I've got a couple wild hairs over here. We'll just get rid of those just to clean things up a bit. And then I'll come in and I'll whip finish the thread there. And I can clip that out. Now I'm going to prop the hook up just a bit here. I'll put my fingers between the two beads and shove my fingernails right in so that that red bead jams right up to the front edge of the abdomen. And I've got just the tiniest amount of space between the two beads at the front. I'll take my red thread and start it again right in that space between the two beads. And I want to build a good solid thread base and then trim my tag out. Now the whole idea I had on this fly was to try to use these beautiful Coq de Leon hen feathers to make a collar on a smaller fly. And the technique I came up with sort of led to the development of this pattern. But really this fly is more about the technique than it is about the exact pattern. You can certainly change the colors and mix and match it, but any place you want to use a feather with longer fibers to create a smaller collar, this is a good spot for it. So what I'll do here, first I'm going to build a dubbing loop, and I don't need a very long one, maybe 2 or 3 inches. I'll bring the thread back up between the two beads, cross it over the two legs, and cinch it down. And then I take one of the legs and I'll put it in my material spring. That just keeps the dubbing whirl from twisting my thread and my dubbing loop together while I'm trying to place the hackle fibers. Now there's a sort of a special trick for getting the hackle fibers into the dubbing loop without having to fight with them too much. And you don't need a special tool. You can just use your fingers. And I'll show you that here now. So once we've got our dubbing and hackle fibers lined up, we can pick that clump up off the table, like so. And I'm going to remove my dubbing loop from the spring. And I'll place these fibers along with the dubbing in the loop. Now, one thing that I'll usually do is I'll come through on the bottom edge here, and you can sort of tap them to square them up a bit. In the case of the two colors here, whatever color you want to be the undercolor of the collar, you should have closest to the hook. So I've lined those up. I'm going to pinch the loop just underneath the fibers, and I'll spin my dubbing whirl. And you don't need a crazy amount of spin here, but let that twist work through your fingers until those fibers start to radiate around the thread. And you can see most of the dubbing that you put in there comes out. It does add a little bit of a highlight and a little bit of density to the core, but essentially what we've just done is created a smaller hackle stem for the feather that we're about to wrap, the feather that we just made. So I'm going to take my dubbing brush and I just sort of run it down the fibers, and that just picks out any of the trap dubbing or trap fibers. You can see that sweeps it back as well, much like an old school wet fly collar. And then I use the dubbing whirl itself as my hackle pliers to begin to wrap this collar between the two beads. You can see I'll just fold those fibers back after each turn. And you don't need many, 2 or 3. You can see those barbs come just past the point on the barb. And then I'll tie the loop off. You can see very often it will spin like that as you tighten it down, and that's the twisted thread sort of creeping down inside the recess in the front bead. I'll trim the loop out, just make a few turns there to anchor that in place. And you can see the beauty of that technique, creating that smaller collar with a bigger feather. We've got a 2-color collar with a little bit of highlighted dubbing in there, and you could certainly use a different colored dubbing. To finish the fly off, we're going to add 2 little horns, and this is the same turkey biots that we used for the tail. So I'm going to take 2 purple biots, and the first one I'm going to tie in on the far side, and I tie these flat. The tip is going to come just short of the base of the tail. I'm going to lay it in along the far side of the hook and catch it with a couple of turns. And I'll take the next biot and do the same on the near side, and I want these about the same length. Like so. And again, you can sort of tweak the long ends to line those up. Get a few turns to anchor those. Now, one thing that I found, anytime you're tying biots in, it's very easy. If I cut these off right now, you'll be tying the fly on the river, and when you go to tighten your knot down, you'll pull those biots out because they're so slick. So what I've been doing is folding these butt ends back and catching them with a turn of thread on each side, just so we've got a fold in there to anchor that down. Then I can trim those butt ends out right up close. Just a more secure way to tie those in. And then our last step is just going to be a little tiny pinch of that same dubbing to build our collar behind the bead. I like to overdo this just a slight amount because I'm going to brush it out. So I'm just using this to cover that thread collar. And I'll whip finish my thread and let it slide off the back edge of that purple bead and tuck in underneath that dubbing. Now here's a slick way to put some resin on those wraps. I'm going to take that working thread and just put a bit of bone dry on it, just right up here close to the hook. And I'll make 2 or 3 turns just to let that resin get on the thread, and then I can unwind and I can trim that thread out. So I just used the thread to apply the bone dry to those thread wraps underneath. That was after the whip finish. Just makes for a very clean application of the bone dry resin. You can come in and, depending on how shaggy you want your dubbing, you can pick it out with your dubbing brush. Seems my dubbing brush has got more loose fibers than the fly, but we'll pick that out a bit. And we've got the problem child. This fly is just sort of a simple attractor pattern. Obviously it's got it's reminiscent of a prince nymph, which in itself is a great attractor pattern. This gives you a little bit more leeway as far as color variations go, and the 2 beads make it a great dropper fly. It's very heavy. It stays down. Typically tie it in size 14 and 16. I have tied it as big as a size 8 though for much larger stones. But really the whole idea was being able to use those beautiful Coq de Leon hen feathers that are so nice and so webby, but unfortunately on the big for most of our trout flies. By using that dubbing loop technique, we can make those fibers into a much smaller collar and put them to use on our regular sized trout stuff. I hope you like the technique. I hope you like the fly. Tie some up. It has really been fun to fish. Very simple, not a whole lot of new technique other than how we apply the dubbing fibers into the loop along with the hackle. But give that a try. Play with it a little bit. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next month. All right, I think I'm back again. Yeah, I think we've got we have a piece of that video that wasn't spliced in that shows the little trick of how I apply the hackle into the dubbing loop, and it sounds like Sam has got that queued up. So while you're still here, just to clear that up, we're going to try to get that posted. I'm just waiting for the go ahead here from Sam that he's got that ready, and I'll show you the little trick to clip those hackle fibers and just set them into onto a little tiny pinch of dubbing and use that as the vehicle to get those fibers into the dubbing loop, which was the whole trick. And I think we're good to go. So watch here, and I'll show you how I do that step, and then we'll take those questions. Okay, the trick to getting these CDL hen fibers into the dubbing loop without losing all of them lies in this little pinch of dubbing. And this is a tiny little pinch of dubbing. You can kind of see it compared to the tips of my scissors there. And it's the same dubbing that I used for the body of the fly. What I want to do is take a small pinch of that, set it down on my tabletop, sort of get that aligned here. You can kind of work it around into position. And I'm going to take my CDL hen feather and I'm going to pull out a clump of fibers and even their tips so that they're square. I'm now going to take this clump and lay it right down on top of the dubbing and trim those off to my predetermined length, my length being dictated by the hook. And I'm just going to cut that off right on top of the dubbing fibers. Then I'm going to take my purple feather, and since this is sort of the main color of the collar, I'm going to use a slightly bigger clump. And I'll peel these fibers off. I'll lay these in so that the tips are the same length as the red, and come in and trim them to length. And they don't have to butt right up next to each other. I do want their tips even. A little space in between is not a big deal. I'll get rid of those butt-ends. And then I'll use my scissor tips to just press that down on top of the dubbing. You can see that's sort of overlapping the dubbing a bit. The dubbing is just a vehicle to make it easier for me to pick these fibers up and keep them together while I go to apply them in the dubbing loop. So the trick to getting this up off the tabletop is just push your scissor blades underneath it. And come in and pinch the clump. And transfer hands. I can even realign those a bit. And again, I'm not worried about the evenness of the butt ends. I can trim those after I've put it into the loop. But I do want the tip ends to remain even. You can see most of the stubbing is going to come out. But that's just the vehicle. So that's going to help me get this from the tabletop here into our dubbing loop. So I'm going to transfer this into my material hand. And now we're going to go back to our dubbing loop. All right, hopefully that will be 10 seconds. And I think we're live. Yes, sir. All right, so that was the little trick for getting those hackle fibers onto a little pinch of dubbing and then using that as the vehicle to get into the dubbing loop. And I think that hopefully explained that pretty well, and that'll be in the archive video as well, so you can kind of go back and watch that. Obviously, you can do multiple colors or even multiple different materials. There's not a special tool needed for that. You don't need any special clamp or clip or any of that. That's one of my peeves in the fly tying industry is solving problems that don't exist. You got a whole bunch of little tools that you came from the factory with and put those to use before you go buy a tool. most stuff you can tie with a pretty basic set of tools if you a little practice to it, and save your $50 and sit down and tie some more flies, and you'll get it. So let's see if we got any more questions coming in. How did I figure that out? I do a lot of dubbing loops, and it's I've always thought of it as a way to make the feather, make a shorter feather or make a bigger feather. You're always trying to, even on big steelhead stuff or musky flies, the idea is to, essentially, if you think of a big dubbing loop, it's or a big dubbing brush, it's like a big hackle feather. And so the whole idea was to try to actually scale it down in this case, and it worked. My ideas don't always work, but you don't see those ones that come out badly. So let's see. The flash on the abdomen instead of wire. I like that mirage flash. I use that on most of my flies. It is fairly prismatic, mirrory. It kind of takes on the color of whatever's under it. It's a fish catching material. I use it on a lot of stuff. I just like that extra little bit of highlight. Wire sort of gets buried down in there. If you wanted a more subtle version, you'd probably not be fishing that fly. It's not very subtle even without that flash, but that's why I picked the flash instead of the wire. You guys, Duck and Oliver, are maybe work through the Chocolate Thunder, and then we'll get into the big stuff. Just give me a call and we'll get you materials. Save the $50, man. There's, like I say, that's just one of those things. I can't in good conscience sell you a tool that you don't need. It's never been something I've been very good at. I'm not, I've never said I'm a salesman. I'll just tell you what's good and what's not good, and why I think that. And it's all just my opinion. But your fingers work pretty darn good, and being a fly tyer, that's just something you gotta learn to do and get used to. So don't count on a tool to always save you. It usually makes it harder. It's another thing to learn to use. My dubbing brush. Or dubbing whirl, I think is what you're after, is a Dyna King dubbing whirl. Let me get it up here where you can see it. This one's got some thread in it. Get that out of there. So it's just like a plumb bob with some wire spreaders. So when I put it in the loop, it holds the loop open, and then I put the material in, and then I pull down on it, and the legs will come together, and the loop will close. And then you just spin it up, and it spins very quickly, so nothing jumps out of the loop. I've used these for years and years. There's probably 10 of them laying on my desk here in one spot or another. I use them a ton, and a lot of my fly. It's funny. I use dubbing loops, but not necessarily for dubbing so much, but in various different places. But that's a tool that is in my kit that I use as often as anything else. Besides scissors, bobbin, and a whip finisher. I probably use this as often as a hair stacker. So for my stuff, I use a dubbing whirl an awful lot. I had a couple of regular Coors banquets before we started, and I figured a third one might get me in trouble. Have I broken those, or am I doing it wrong? Broken a dubbing whirl? I haven't broken a dubbing whirl. You're probably doing it wrong, Danny, which is really of no surprise to anybody. Don't be so aggressive. Take it a little easier. What fly is the problem child most similar to, and what does it do better? Gosh, there's not a whole lot that it's super similar to, to be honest. The idea is I wanted to, I've been fishing Wyoming and Idaho the last few years. My wife and I go up there during the summer, and we fish a lot of medium-sized flies. In Colorado, we fish a lot of small flies or big flies, but a lot of medium-sized flies. So I really kind of got that idea. The initial impetus for it was kind of thinking of a medium-size, 12, 14, even a size 10 size nymph that was tractory. So that's where it came around. And the whole idea is I'm able to use that multicolored mottled collar on a smaller fly. Is there a big difference between a hand whip finish or a whip finish using the tool? Yes, there's a huge difference. A hand whip finish on a beadhead fly is probably not as big a deal, but on a conventional fly where you just have a thread head, the problem with a hand whip finish is your thread twists. Your fingers have fingerprints on them. Obviously, they got texture to them. The thread rolls off your fingers as you slide your fingers out of the loop to tie the knot. And I find that twist keeps the knot from really anchoring down tightly. So there are occasions where I'll use a hand whip finish, but honestly, for the most part, I think the tool ties it much better. It's much more smooth. It's always smooth, which my fingers aren't always smooth. So I really do prefer a tool whip finish. I use the TMCO Midge whip finisher. That's sort of my go-to these days. I use the tool to tie 99.9% of my whip finishes. I'm not a big fan of the hand whip finish. Looks like we got another one here. Okay, so yeah, we're coming up to the Fat Angie here. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. So Court says you got to tell the story behind the Fat Angie name before you show the video. So the Fat Angie is a fly that I came up with after fishing a bunch of chubbies and big foamy attractor dries. And I just find them classless and boring. And I know the fish eat them. Fish eat marshmallows too. That doesn't mean I want to fish with them. So I came about working on this fly, and when I came up with it, I don't know what made it pop into my head, but when I was a kid, I have 4 sisters, and we were at my grandmother's house, and my grandmother at that point was fairly old, and the youngest sister is the youngest of I don't know how many grandchildren, 40 or something like that. And so my grandmother was fairly old, and she couldn't always remember her name. And my sister's name is Andrea, but my grandmother, for some reason, called her Angie. She thought her name was Angela or Angie. So one day, my sister at the ripe young age of like 12 or 13 years old was standing talking to my grandmother, and my grandmother said to her, it's just the worst thing you can say to a 13-year-old girl. And she said, Angie, you're getting a little fat. So of course, my other sisters and I, being siblings and caring family members, immediately jumped on that nickname and have called my younger sister Fat Angie. Called her Fat Angie for years since then. So this fly's got kind of a bubble butt on the back end of it, and I very often name flies after people I know. So that's my little sister Andrea Smith, and she is the name of the Fat Angie. So that's where that one came from. It's a pretty good one, and I don't know. I thought that one was pretty fun. That's always been a good one. Let's see. We got a couple more, and then we'll start the video. No, Lance, I don't always have smooth office hands ready for a whip finish. Sometimes I actually have to go out and do some manual labor, which I abhor. I think you got that. Anniversary hats. Good question. We just had our 16th anniversary at Charlie Slybox. We're in our new location, and of course, COVID has sort of prevented us from having our anniversary party, which usually happens in December. But I tell you, we will for sure have it in the spring. We'll have something that very late outdoors. Hopefully, this whole mess gets where we all live through it, and we can all see each other again in person in a big group and have a good time. I'm raring to go. I'm excited about it, but we will have our 16-year hats and our 16th anniversary party sometime this spring. So stay tuned on the website. Just CharlieSlybox.com. Stay tuned there, and we'll take it from there. So I think if we're ready, let's get that Fat Angie video started up, and we'll do that one, and then I'll take more questions as we go. Looks good here, and we'll move right along. All right, guys, stay tuned. We'll be right back after this Fat Angie. All right, we're about to tie a Fat Angie. This is a fly that I have sort of been working on for the last several years. Started off as a small ant, and sort of branched out into a whole other realm. So I tie the mini Fat Angie and the big Fat Angie, or maybe smaller Fat Angie and big Fat Angie. But at any rate, this fly was sort of the idea was to make a medium-sized pattern that would imitate a large ant or just a general terrestrial, and this is what I came up with. So what I've got here is a Daiichi 1167. This is a clinkhammer hook, and you can see it's got a pretty severe bend in it, and that's on purpose. I want the back end of this fly to sit down low in the water. When I was
developing this fly, I looked at pictures of real ants in the water, and you know, if you pay attention to kind of how they sit, their butt end is pretty far down in the water. So that's why I went with this curved hook. And I'm tying a size 14. This would be a medium size. I tie these up to size 8s, much bigger, and kind of use them as a dry dropper bug. And then, you know, all the way down to size 16 or 18 typically. But I do fish this size 14 a lot. You know, just kind of a general attractor summertime bug. And I'm going to start off with some 14-aught red Vivas. And of course you could do this in black. I'm making this one a little more attractory colored, but I'm going to start this thread about in the center of the hook. And I'm going to make a thread base well down around the bend. And come back up again. Now this is a foam-bodied fly, and one of the catches on foam-bodied flies is as you fish them, if you don't have them glued to the hook, they break loose. So before we even tie the foam down, I'm going to take and put just a little light coat of Zap-A-Gap right over the top of that base. Now the body on this is 3mm foam, and I cut it fairly square. That end's not terribly square. I'll get you a little better look. So about 3 by 3mm. And if you look closely here, you can see I've knocked the top edges off. That outside curve, I just brought my scissors in there and kind of knocked that off, just to round that up a little bit. But I'm going to take this piece of foam, and just about even with the hook point, I'm going to catch it here on top of the hook, and I'm going to spiral wrap back over it all the way down over that glued thread base, and I want to keep it oriented upright on the hook there. And I can anchor that foam down tightly. Now the abdomen is just mahogany brown certified dubbing. You can use rusty brown also. It's going to take a little more than you think. I'm going to probably have to do this in 2 increments because the camera is pretty close to me, so I can't make too long a strand of dubbing. But I want this dubbing on fairly tight. And I'll start it back here at the bend, and I want to build a big fat butt end on this fly. So I'm going to work back and forth and fatten up that back end, the gaster end of the ant. And you can see I haven't come off the end of the foam. It's still showing up here. And then as I run the dubbing, I'll jump up onto bare hook. And I'll run that thread all the way forward and back again to that edge. Once I get there, I usually reposition the hook a bit. Just makes gravity work a little more for me rather than against me. So again, before I tie this foam down, just in the interest of durability, I'm going to put just a touch of Zap right there on the top of that thread base. And I'm going to pull this piece of foam over. I don't really stretch it very tightly. I'll bring my thread straight up over the top and then pull straight down. Get a couple turns on there, like so. So we've got that fat back end. Then I'm going to bump my thread forward just a little bit, just an eye length or 2, and I'll catch that foam again. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cover that little section with a band thread. So that's going to make our weight there in the center. So now for the legs, this is just black super floss, and I'm going to take 2 strands, and I'm just going to put 1 on each side. I'll take the first one here on my near side and catch it right in the middle of that thread band. Get a few turns on it, and you can sort of position it right in place. I'll just cut the other end of that off and use it on the other side. Catch this right in place on the far side with a few turns. And again, if you catch those in the center of that band, you can kind of get them to spread out nice and even like that. And don't feel bad about manually adjusting them to get them to sit where you want. So now what I'll do, I'm going to lift this foam up again, and I'm going to bring it forward another third. And with this real curved hook, you can see I just keep repositioning it to kind of keep everything lined up. And I'll bring my thread up and down again and make one more segment here. And bind that down in place, lift it up again, and come all the way up to the hook eye, and bind it down once more. Now once I'm there, you can see the advantage of having these legs short. I keep moving them out of the way just so that you can see what I'm doing. But the advantage of having those legs short is, see how the thread will just push them out of the way. If you leave them real long, they're going to be in your way more. I'm going to trim that front end of the foam down just a bit, and then again I'm going to create another band of thread here in between those last two segments. So you can kind of see what we've got going on there now. Now for the wing on this fly, what I've been using is that same polypropylene macrame yarn that I used on the stubby chubby and the elevated chubby that we talked about a few issues back. In this case, I've got rust and tan and gray and black sort of all mixed together. I've brushed them together. And I'm going to take a little clump of this. And the size of the wing, the density of the wing is sort of up to you. You know, if you're using it as a dry dropper fly, hanging a bead head or something underneath it, maybe make the wing a little bit heavier. If you're fishing it as a true ant, which is something that is not done enough, but if you're fishing it as a true ant, go a little bit heavier. So I'd call that a little on the heavy side. So I take a little clump of that, and then I'm going to take some blue UV ice fiber, and I'm just going to take a few strands. And I'm going to set that in with the wing material. And I don't really necessarily put it on top, I just put it with it. You know, it always ends up on top somewhere, and I'll just cut it to the same length as the material clump. So now I've got that flash mixed in with the wing material. And I'll lay this in right at the front edge of the body, and I'm going to catch it with a couple turns at the center of its length. And then I'll come around and X this in, sort of like bad spinner wings, so that they're kind of swept back. And you can see how bright that flash appears under this bright light. As silly as it seems, those few little strands of flash stuck in there make this fly so much more visible on the water. I've been doing this on a lot of my tractor dries, just putting a little bit of that blue UV in there, and it really makes the fly a lot easier to see. Now before I get too far along, I'm going to tie in a brown hackle, and this one is one that I dyed. This is a badger dyed fiery brown, but a regular brown hackle will work fine here. I'm going to tie this in right here at this front edge, right up to the base of the wing, and then I'll take another pinch of that mahogany dubbing, and it's not going to take much here. We're going to dub our thorax, and we're just really kind of making a base for the hackle with this dubbing, not necessarily trying to build up a whole lot of volume here. So I'll get that dubbing on there. I'll sweep those legs back. I'm going to dub from the front right up to the base of the wing. And come forward and end with bare thread just behind the hook eye there. So now I'll take my hackle feather and I'm going to start palmering him, just evenly spaced turns. Right up to the eye. Tie him off with a couple good tight turns. And then I can come in and trim that feather out. I'll lift the front end of that foam up, and I'm just going to tuck enough turns of thread between the hook eye and that piece of foam to elevate it slightly. It's purely selfishly for me to keep that hook eye a little exposed, so that when I go to tie this fly on, it goes a little bit easier. So then I'll take my whip finisher, and I'll tuck that whip finish in underneath there as well. Cinch my hook down tight, trim my thread out, and then we'll commence to trimming the other pieces. I always like to kind of straighten the legs out, get them right where I want them. About like so. These back legs will be about half again the length of the body, the front legs just about up to the hook eye. This front end I'm just going to trim off square straight across just beyond the hook eye. And these wings are going to be just a little longer than the body. So I'm going to bring these up just past the end of the body, and I'll just trim those straight across, kind of fluff them out a little bit. Now I typically come in and trim this hackle off the bottom, and the way I do that is I'll just pinch everything from the bottom and bring my scissors up and trim that off flush. And you can always go in and clean that up so it sits just a little bit lower. Just makes the fly sit low on the water, but still gives us that surface area that helps to float it. Being a foam fly, it doesn't need a whole lot of help, but that little bit of surface area certainly doesn't hurt. I'm going to knock the edges off that front cut just to round things up a bit. And if you really want to get picky, you could knock that edge off it as well, and you've got a pretty ant-shaped little head. And then I'll usually turn this fly over and put just a little drop of zap gap right on that trimmed hackle and on the thread waist between the abdomen and the second section, just to toughen that up a little bit. And that's our Fat Angie. Like I say, just general attractor. Kind of could be a wasp, it could be an ant, could be a flying ant. Obviously is with those wings. Just general critter. Could be a beetle. You know, there's all sorts of different sizes and shapes of beetles out there in the world, but this is the little version. I tie them in all sorts of sizes. You know, up to real big. You know, with a double wing. And that is our finished Fat Angie. So I hope you enjoyed that. I should probably mention you can certainly put a little pink indicator in on top. That's an optional step, and I usually do that on the bigger ones. You know, it's very easy to do on the small ones as well. There you go. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Before I let you go, I should probably tell you where Fat Angie came from. This fly is actually named after my little sister, and her name is not Angie, and she's not fat. So you'll have to read the article to hear the story about that, but that's where it came from. Anyway, there. Thanks for watching. Take care.
All right, so there goes the Fat Angie. That was a pretty little video, really. That one came out pretty clear. I was watching it myself here on Instagram, and I always like when those come out sharp and clear. That makes me happy. See, we got a couple of questions that came in the interim. Why floss instead of rubber for the leg? That's a great question. Super floss is spandex elastic, and it is much, much more durable and long-lasting than regular rubber legs. Rubber legs dry rot after a year in your box, and you know, I tie a bunch of flies at a time, so I might not use them all this year. And my least favorite thing in the world is to pull out a fly and have the rubber legs crumble off of it. You know, we see it in the shop bins, flies that have over a season. If they've got rubber legs, they start to rot and get a little crispy. So that's a durability standpoint there. You know, aside from the fact that the Spanflex or Superfloss comes in a lot more colors than rubber does, so I think it's just a better material. I think it's just tougher stuff. I had another point I was going to bring on that. You know, you can use Superfloss for a lot of different things. You can use it to wrap around a hook to build a body out of. You can use it for legs. It you know, comes in speckled versions. You can color it with a marker. It's really a pretty handy material, and like I say, it's much tougher. So that's why I sort of think Superfloss. Have I tried putting the blue eye stub and other wings on smaller stuff like